What happens when Florence Pugh walks onto the set of The View? And within minutes, the atmosphere shifts so sharply that even a veteran like Whoopi Goldberg is left momentarily speechless. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping moment, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Stage View, drop a like, and tell us in the comments what you think is about to happen. Because trust me, this is one of those interviews people will be talking about for a long time. The studio lights glow warmly, almost deceptively calm. The familiar set hums with anticipation, the low murmur of the audience swelling into applause as the hosts take their seats. Whoopi leans back slightly in her chair, relaxed, confident. This is her territory. Around her, the co-hosts exchange quick smiles, shuffling notes, preparing for what is expected to be another lively but controlled segment. But something is different today. The energy backstage had already shifted long before the cameras rolled. Producers whispering a little too urgently. A last-minute change in the rundown. A subtle tension in the air that seasoned crew members recognize but never openly acknowledge. And then Florence Pugh steps out. She doesn't just walk onto the stage, she arrives. Calm, composed, but carrying a quiet intensity that immediately cuts through the room. She smiles, waves, acknowledges the applause, but her eyes reveal something deeper. Something focused. Whoopi notices it instantly. "Welcome, welcome," Whoopi says, her voice smooth practiced. "It's good to have you here." Florence sits, crossing her legs, leaning slightly forward. "Thank you for having me." There's a brief pause, barely noticeable to the casual viewer, but palpable to anyone paying close attention. It's the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. The conversation begins as expected. Light questions, a bit of humor, mentions of Florence's recent projects, her performances, the usual rhythm of daytime television. The audience laughs at the right moments. The hosts nod along. Everything appears perfectly on track. But Florence, she's not settling in. Her answers are polite but layered. Thoughtful. Slightly more deliberate than usual. She doesn't deflect, she leans in. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she begins to take control of the conversation. Whoopi adjusts in her seat. "So," Whoopi continues, glancing briefly at her notes, "you've been very vocal lately about the pressures in Hollywood, especially around how women are portrayed." Florence tilts her head slightly. "Yes, because it matters." Simple words. But the tone, firm, grounded, lands differently. Whoopi nods. "Of course. But some people would say it's just part of the industry. It's been that way for a long time." And there it is. The shift. Florence doesn't respond immediately. She takes a breath. The kind of breath that signals something is about to change. The audience quiets. "Just because something has been a certain way for a long time," Florence says slowly, her voice steady but edged with emotion, "doesn't mean it should continue." A ripple moves through the room. Whoopi raises an eyebrow, slightly intrigued, slightly cautious. "That's fair. But it's also a business." Florence leans forward now, her gaze locking in. "It is. But it's also people. Real people. And the way we normalize certain things, especially for women, it has consequences." The co-hosts exchange glances. This isn't the usual promotional chat anymore. Whoopi shifts again, her tone sharpening just a touch. "Are you saying the audience is part of the problem?" A bold question. And Florence doesn't back away. "I think we all are," she replies. "Including me. Including you. Including everyone watching." A murmur spreads through the audience, some impressed, some surprised, some unsure how to react. Whoopi pauses. It's rare. Whoopi Goldberg, someone who has navigated decades of live television, debates, heated discussions, pauses. And Florence notices. "You've had an incredible career," Florence continues, her voice softening slightly, but her words still precise. "You've seen how things have evolved. But you've also seen what hasn't changed." Whoopi exhales lightly, a faint smile forming. But it's not entirely relaxed. "You're not wrong. There's a subtle shift in tone now. Less host and guest. More something else. Something closer to equals in a conversation neither fully controls anymore." "But let me ask you this," Whoopi says, leaning forward. "What do you expect to change? Overnight?" Florence shakes her head. "No, but I expect honesty. I expect conversations like this to be real." And suddenly the room feels smaller, more intimate, more intense. The cameras capture every flicker of expression, every microreaction. The audience is no longer just watching, they're absorbing. One of the co-hosts tries to lighten the mood. "Well, you're definitely bringing the real today." A few laughs break out, but they're nervous. Florence smiles briefly, but it doesn't fully reach her eyes. I think people are ready for it. Whoopi studies her. There's respect there now. And curiosity. But also something else, something unspoken. Challenge. Whoopi says slowly, a lot of people come on this show, and they keep things safe. Florence's expression doesn't change. I'm not very good at that. A beat. And then, unexpectedly, the audience applauds. Not loudly, not wildly, but enough. Enough to signal that something real just happened. Whoopi leans back, folding her hands. Clearly, there's a hint of a smile now. Genuine this time. But the tension hasn't disappeared, it's evolved. Because beneath the surface, a new question is forming. How far is this conversation going to go? Backstage, producers are watching closely. Some nodding, some uneasy. This is live television. Unpredictable, unfiltered in moments like these. And Florence, she's just getting started. She glances briefly at the audience, then back at Whoopi. Can I ask you something? That alone is enough to shift the balance completely. Whoopi raises an eyebrow again. You can try. A few chuckles ripple through the room. But Florence doesn't smile this time. When you look back, she says carefully, do you ever wish you had pushed harder? Said more? Challenged things more directly? The question lands like a spark in dry air. The audience goes silent. The co-hosts freeze. And Whoopi, for the first time in a long time, doesn't immediately answer. The camera zooms in slightly, capturing every detail. The subtle tightening of her jaw, the thoughtful narrowing of her eyes, the weight of a question that isn't just about the past, but about everything that led to this moment. Because this isn't just an interview anymore. It's something else entirely. And everyone in that studio can feel it. The line between conversation and confrontation has just been crossed. And no one, not even Whoopi Goldberg, is quite sure what comes next. Whoopi doesn't answer right away. The silence stretches just long enough to make everyone in the studio aware that something significant has shifted. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels full. Full of memory, of calculation, of restraint. Whoopi Goldberg tilts her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in focus. She's been here before. Maybe not this exact moment, not this exact question, but she knows what it feels like when a conversation stops being comfortable and starts becoming real. Well, she begins slowly, her voice lower now, more deliberate. That depends on what you think I didn't say. A subtle murmur ripples through the audience. Florence Pugh doesn't hesitate this time. She leans in just a fraction more, her posture open but unwavering. I don't think it's about what you didn't say, she replies. I think it's about what you could have said, if the space allowed it. The words are careful, but they land with precision. One of the co-hosts shifts in her seat, glancing toward the producers off camera. This isn't part of the usual rhythm anymore. There's no script for this kind of exchange. Whoopi lets out a quiet breath through her nose, a half-smile forming. But it's edged now. You're assuming the space didn't allow it, she says. Florence's gaze doesn't break. Did it? Another pause. The audience is completely still now. No laughter. No whispering. Just attention. Whoopi leans forward, resting her hands on the table. Let me tell you something, she says, her voice steady but carrying weight. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you learn that saying everything you want, exactly how you want, doesn't always get you the result you think it will. Florence nods slightly, listening, but not backing down. I understand that, she says. But isn't that also part of the problem? That we've all learned to adjust instead of challenge. A co-host finally jumps in, trying to soften the edges. I think what Florence is saying is that times are changing, right? There's more room now. Florence turns gently toward her, not dismissive but firm. I hope there is. Then she looks back at Whoopi. But I also think that room didn't just appear. People had to make it. Sometimes by being uncomfortable. Whoopi's expression shifts again. This time, something deeper flickers behind her eyes. Recognition. Uncomfortable, Whoopi repeats, almost to herself. You think I haven't been uncomfortable? The tone isn't defensive, it's real. Grounded in years, in experience, in things not said out loud. Florence softens, just slightly. I think you have, she says. I think you've carried a lot of that for a long time. Now the tension changes again. It's no longer sharp. It's heavy, because this isn't just about disagreement anymore. It's about perspective. Generations. Different battles fought in different ways. Whoopi leans back, folding her arms, not closed off but reflective. You know what's interesting? She says. People look at someone like me and assume I had all this power, that I could just say whatever I wanted and everything would change. She shakes her head. That's not how it worked. Florence listens closely, her expression serious now. There were things you could say, Whoopi continues, and things you couldn't. Lines you could push and lines that, if you crossed them, you weren't coming back. The audience shifts slightly, absorbing the weight of her words. And when you're one of the few voices in the room that even gets heard, Whoopi adds, you start thinking about what happens if that voice disappears. A quiet understanding settles over the studio. Florence exhales softly, her intensity easing, not disappearing, but evolving. I hear that, she says. I really do. And for a moment, it feels like the conversation might settle. But then, that's why it matters even more now, Florence continues, her voice gaining strength again. Because there are more voices, more platforms, more people watching. She gestures lightly toward the audience, toward the cameras, toward everything. And if we still hold back, then what changed? The question hangs there, not accusatory, but undeniable. One of the co-hosts nods slowly. That's a powerful point. Another adds, but there's also something to be said for strategy. Timing. Choosing your battles. Florence turns again, her expression calm but resolute. And who decides which battles are worth choosing? That lands harder than expected. Because now, it's not just a conversation between two people. It's a conversation about systems. About who gets to speak and when and how. Whoopi watches her closely. There's no irritation now. Only focus. You're asking a lot of questions, Whoopi says. Florence gives a small, almost knowing smile. I think we need more of them. A faint ripple of applause breaks out, stronger this time. More confident. Whoopi glances briefly at the audience, then back at Florence. And what about answers? She asks. You got those too? Florence doesn't rush it. I don't think one person has the answers, she says. But I think we need to stop pretending we don't see the problems. The room goes quiet again, because that, more than anything, is what's cutting through. Not volume, not confrontation. Clarity. Whoopi nods slowly, tapping her fingers lightly against the table. You know, she says, you remind me of someone. Florence raises an eyebrow slightly. Oh, me, Whoopi says. A small wave of laughter moves through the audience, but it's warm this time, not nervous. But, Whoopi adds, her tone shifting again, you're coming up in a different time. A louder time. A faster time. Florence tilts her head. Do you think that's a bad thing? Whoopi considers it. I think it's a different thing, she says. And different comes with its own challenges. Florence nods slowly. That's fair. Another pause, but this one feels less tense. More thoughtful. More balanced. For a brief moment, it seems like the storm has passed. But then Florence leans forward again. And there's something new in her expression now. Not just conviction. Not just intensity. But curiosity mixed with something deeper. Something personal. Can I be honest? She asks. Whoopi gives a slight smile. I get the feeling you're going to be anyway. A few laughs break out. Florence doesn't smile this time. I was nervous coming here, she admits. That catches everyone off guard. Whoopi raises her eyebrows slightly. You, nervous? Florence nods. Because this show matters. The conversations here reach people in a way that a lot of platforms don't. She pauses, choosing her words carefully. And I didn't want to come here and just perform. The word perform lingers in the air. Whoopi leans forward again, intrigued. So what did you want to do? Florence meets her gaze directly. I wanted to be honest, she says. Even if it made things uncomfortable. A beat. And then, Whoopi smiles. Not the host's smile. Not the practiced, television-ready expression. A real one. Well, she says, leaning back in her chair, you're doing a hell of a job. The audience applauds, louder now, more unified. But beneath the applause, something else is building again. Because honesty, once it enters the room like this, it doesn't just sit quietly. It spreads. And as the cameras continue to roll, and the producers exchange increasingly concerned glances behind the scenes, one thing becomes clear. This conversation isn't winding down. It's only getting deeper. And whatever comes next might be the moment that truly changes everything. The applause fades, but the energy in the room doesn't settle. It tightens. It's the kind of tension that doesn't come from conflict alone, but from something more unpredictable, truth unfolding in real time. Whoopi Goldberg leans back in her chair, her fingers resting lightly against the table, her eyes still locked on Florence Pugh. There's no script guiding this now. No neat transition to the next segment. Just two people in a conversation that has outgrown its boundaries. And everyone knows it. All right, Whoopi says, her voice measured, but with a new edge of curiosity. Let's take this a step further. A ripple moves through the audience. Florence doesn't flinch. If anything, she seems more grounded now, more certain of why she's here. You're talking about honesty, Whoopi continues. About not performing. About pushing conversations forward. She tilts her head slightly. So let me ask you something real. The room stills again. What do you think happens, Whoopi says slowly, when honesty starts costing people their careers? That lands heavy. A few audience members shift in their seats. One of the co-hosts glances sideways, clearly sensing where this could go. Florence takes a breath. Not a defensive breath. A deliberate one. I think it already does, she answers. No hesitation. No cushioning. Just truth. Whoopi nods once, almost imperceptibly. Exactly. There's no disagreement there. But there's something else. Challenge. So knowing that, Whoopi presses, leaning forward now. Are you prepared for that cost? The question cuts deeper than anything that's come before. Because now, it's not theoretical anymore. It's personal. Florence's expression shifts for the first time. Not uncertainty, but reflection. The weight of reality pressing against conviction. I think, she begins, then pauses. And that pause says everything. I think there are different kinds of cost, she continues, her voice quieter now but no less steady. There's the cost of speaking, and there's the cost of staying silent. A murmur spreads through the audience. Whoopi watches her closely, her gaze unwavering. And which one do you think is heavier? Whoopi asks. Florence looks down for a brief moment, then back up. The one you have to live with, she says. The room exhales. Because that answer doesn't just sit on the surface, it sinks in. One of the co-hosts nods slowly, almost to herself. That's powerful. But Whoopi isn't letting the moment drift. She leans in further. You know what I hear? Whoopi says. I hear someone who hasn't had to make that choice yet. The words are calm, but they hit like a spark. The audience reacts instantly. Some gasps, some whispers, a sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the front row. Florence doesn't recoil. But something changes. Not defensiveness. Not anger. Focus. I think I'm making it right now, she replies. And just like that, the balance shifts again. Whoopi's eyes narrow slightly, not in hostility, but in recognition of the moment escalating beyond expectation. You think this is the moment? Whoopi asks. Florence nods once. I do. The air feels heavier now. Denser. Because this isn't just a conversation about ideas anymore. It's becoming a defining moment. One that both of them are actively shaping, word by word. Then let's not dance around it, Whoopi says. A co-host quickly interjects, her voice lighter, a clear attempt to ease the tension. Okay, maybe we should dance around it just a little. A few nervous laughs break out. But neither Whoopi nor Florence looks away from each other. The moment doesn't break. It deepens. You're in an industry, Whoopi continues, that builds people up and tears them down just as fast. You've seen it. You've lived around it. Florence nods slightly. So when you push like this, Whoopi adds, when you challenge things publicly, you're not just making a statement. You're putting a target on your back. The word target echoes. Florence's jaw tightens just slightly, but her voice remains calm. Maybe that's what it takes. A sharp reaction from the audience, some applause, some audible surprise. Whoopi doesn't react immediately. She studies Florence. Really studies her. You believe that? Whoopi asks quietly. Florence leans forward again, her eyes unwavering. I believe that change doesn't happen quietly, she says. And I think a lot of people are tired of pretending it does. There it is again. That clarity. That refusal to soften the edges. One of the co-hosts shakes her head slightly, half smiling. You are not holding back today. Florence finally lets out a small breath, almost a laugh, but it's brief. I don't think we can afford to. The audience claps again, stronger this time, more confident, more divided in emotion but united in attention. Whoopi raises her hand slightly, and the applause fades. You keep saying we, Whoopi says. Who's we? Florence doesn't hesitate. Anyone who feels like they've had to shrink themselves to fit into something that doesn't reflect who they are. The words resonate, deeply, because now the conversation has expanded beyond Hollywood, beyond the industry. It's touching something universal. Whoopi nods slowly. That's a big we dot. Florence meets her gaze. It is. Another pause. But this one feels different. Not tense. Not confrontational. But charged. Like something is building toward a point neither of them can fully predict. And then, Whoopi shifts. Not physically at first, but emotionally. Her posture softens. Her expression changes. The sharp edge gives way to something more reflective. More personal. You know, she says slowly, there's something people don't always understand about sitting at this table. She gestures lightly around the set of the view. Every word you say here, she continues, it doesn't just stay here. It travels. It gets picked apart, twisted, amplified. Florence listens carefully. And sometimes, Whoopi adds, what people hear isn't what you meant. That lands differently, because it's not a challenge. It's a warning. Florence nods, absorbing it. I know, she says. But I also think silence gets interpreted too. Whoopi tilts her head slightly. How? Florence takes a breath. As agreement, she says. The room goes still again. Because that's the kind of statement that lingers. That sparks something. Whoopi exhales slowly, leaning back once more. There's a long pause. Longer than any before. The cameras don't cut away. The producers don't interrupt. No one dares break it. Because something real is happening. Something unscripted. Something that feels important. And then Whoopi speaks again. But this time, her voice is quieter. More personal. Let me ask you one last thing, she says. Florence nods. Whoopi leans forward, her gaze steady, her tone stripped of performance. When this is over, when the cameras stop and the headlines start, she pauses. Are you ready for how this might be told? The question hangs in the air like a final note before a storm breaks. Florence doesn't answer immediately. For the first time, she looks out at the audience, then back at Whoopi, and there's something different in her eyes now. Not just conviction, not just courage, but awareness of everything that's about to come next. And as she opens her mouth to respond, the tension in the room reaches its peak. Because whatever she says next won't just end the conversation. Don't end when the cameras stop rolling. It will define it. Florence doesn't rush her answer. The question from Whoopi Goldberg lingers in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Are you ready for how this might be told? For a brief moment, everything else fades. The lights, the cameras, the audience. It's just Florence Pugh, and the weight of what comes after truth is spoken out loud. She inhales slowly, then meets Whoopi's gaze. I don't think you can ever be fully ready, she says, her voice calm but deeply grounded. But I think if you believe in what you're saying, you accept that you don't get to control the story once it leaves your mouth. A hush falls over the room, not because it's loud, but because it's final. Whoopi watches her for a long second, then nods. Not as a host, not even as a challenger, but as someone who understands exactly what that means. Yeah, Whoopi says quietly. That part doesn't get easier. And just like that, the tension that had been building for the entire segment doesn't explode. It settles, but not into comfort, into something heavier, something real. One of the co-hosts exhales audibly, placing a hand over her chest. Okay, I feel like we all just went through something together. A ripple of soft laughter breaks through the audience, relieved, but still emotional. Another co-host leans in, her tone gentler now. This is why conversations like this matter. Florence finally leans back slightly in her chair, the intensity in her posture easing, not disappearing, but transforming into something quieter. More reflective. I didn't come here to argue, she says. I came here to connect. Whoopi gives a faint smile. Well, you definitely didn't argue. A small pause. You challenged, Whoopi adds. Florence nods. I think we need more of that. The audience applauds again, this time not out of excitement, but appreciation, because they've witnessed something rare. Not a shouting match, not a viral meltdown, but a conversation that risked something. The cameras slowly begin to pull back, signaling the segment is nearing its end. But the energy in the room hasn't faded. It's simply shifted into reflection. Thank you for being here, Whoopi says, turning slightly toward Florence. And for keeping it real. Florence smiles, softer now. Thank you for letting me. There's a brief exchange of looks between them. Mutual respect, hard-earned in real time. But as the show transitions, as the music begins to rise faintly in the background, and as the audience claps one last time, something else is already happening. Because outside that studio, the story is just beginning. Within minutes of the segment ending on the view, clips start circulating. Short snippets, carefully cut moments. Florence saying, "We can't afford to stay silent." Whoopi asking, "Are you ready for the cost?" The internet does what it always does. It reacts. Some headlines frame it as a bold confrontation. Others call it a generational clash. A few praise it as one of the most honest conversations the show has had in years. Social media splits into waves of opinion. Some viewers rally behind Florence, calling her fearless, necessary, refreshing. Others defend Whoopi, highlighting her experience, her perspective, her understanding of the cost that comes with speaking out. And then there are those who see something else entirely. Not conflict, but connection. Clips begin trending. Comments pour in faster than anyone can keep up with. Analysts dissect body language. Fans replay the pause before Whoopi answered. The moment Florence asked her question. The silence that followed. Because sometimes, it's not what's said that lingers. It's what almost wasn't. Backstage, the mood is different. Quieter. Producers huddle around monitors, already tracking engagement numbers climbing faster than expected. One turns to another and says under their breath, "That's going to be everywhere by tonight." And they're right. By evening, the conversation has left the studio completely. It's in living rooms, on phones, across timelines. People aren't just watching it, they're feeling it. And back in a quieter corner of the studio, Florence gathers her things. No dramatic exit, no visible triumph, just a quiet moment of stillness. Whoopi approaches her, not as a host now, but as someone who shared something unscripted. "That wasn't easy," Whoopi says. Florence gives a small, honest smile. "I didn't expect it to be." Whoopi nods. "Good, a beat. Because the easy ones nobody remembers." Florence lets that sink in. "And then, do you?" she asks. Whoopi pauses, then shakes her head slightly. "No," she admits. "I don't." There's a quiet understanding between them now. No cameras, no audience, just truth stripped of performance. And as they part ways, as the studio lights begin to dim, and as the echoes of that conversation continue to ripple outward, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror. For everyone watching. For everyone listening. For everyone deciding whether to speak or stay silent. And now, that decision has been passed on to the audience. So what do you think? Was Florence Pugh right to push the conversation further, even at the risk of discomfort? Or did Whoopi Goldberg raise a deeper truth about the cost of speaking out that can't be ignored? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're reading every single one. And if you want more moments like this, raw, intense, and unforgettable, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit that like button, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because the most powerful conversations don't end when the cameras stop rolling.